Have you ever been in a place where you knew you belonged, yet someone looked at you as if you didn't imagine sitting in the seat you paid for? A child excited to fly for the first time in first class. Now imagine a hand striking your face, not because you did something wrong, but because of the color of your skin. Imagine being dragged away while others sat in silence. What would you do? Would you stay calm? Would you fight back? Or would you hold on to yourself, hoping the truth could speak louder than anger? This is not just about one boy or one flight. It is about a choice. Our choice between silence and courage, between looking away or standing up. If it were your son, your brother, your grandson in that seat, how would you want the world to respond? Stay with me, because what happened next shook one of the biggest airlines in America, and it all began with a boy who refused to be broken. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the story that made the world stop and listen. The cabin lights glowed softly in the early evening as passengers filed onto Apex Air Flight 227 from New York to Los Angeles. The air smelled faintly of leather and coffee, mixed with the tired perfume of travelers rushing to make it on time. First class was nearly full already, and attendants were busy helping customers stow their bags in overhead compartments. In seat 1A sat a boy 13 years old, slim, dark-skinned, wearing a neat blue polo and sneakers that still looked new. His name was Jordan Miles. At first glance, he looked like any ordinary teenager, a little nervous, a little excited. But he was not ordinary. Jordan was the son of Marcus Miles, one of the most powerful black CEOs in America and a major shareholder of Apex Air itself. Tonight, though, no one seemed to know that. Jordan clutched a small leather notebook and a handheld recorder his father had given him for his birthday. Write down what you notice. Record what you feel. Marcus had told him earlier that day, his voice calm as always. Remember, the world will test you, but truth has its own power. Jordan had nodded, unsure if this was supposed to be just another lesson in discipline or something more. Marcus, deliberately, had chosen to fly in economy a few rows back, giving his son a chance to sit alone in first class for the very first time. Jordan was still adjusting the seatbelt when a sharp voice cut through the low murmur of the cabin. "Excuse me," said Cynthia Ward. "The purser of the flight." She was tall, with perfectly tied hair, the kind of woman who believed authority was carried in posture alone. She looked at Jordan not as a passenger, but as an intruder. "This is first class," she said, narrowing her eyes. "Yes, ma'am," Jordan replied politely, showing his boarding pass. "Seat 1A." But Cynthia did not look at the pass. Her lips tightened. Her hand trembled slightly, not from uncertainty, but from anger that this child dared to correct her. Passengers nearby shifted uneasily. Some looked away. Others watched with curiosity, but no one spoke up. "Don't play games with me," Cynthia snapped. "You don't belong here." Before Jordan could respond, she leaned down, with sudden force, slapped him across the face. The sound cracked through the cabin like a whip. Gas filled the air. A woman in row 2 covered her mouth. A man in row 3 shook his head, but kept quiet. Jordan's cheeks stung. His eyes watered, not from pain alone, but from humiliation. His chest tightened, yet he remembered his father's voice. "Calm is stronger than anger. Hold on to yourself." He sat back slowly, lifted the recorder hidden by his notebook, and pressed the red button. "I have my ticket," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the heat in his skin. Cynthia grabbed the boarding pass from his hand, glanced at it, and scoffed. "I don't care what you printed. This is not your seat." At that moment, Another passenger, a white man in his 40s, wearing an expensive suit and gold watch, stepped up behind them. His name was Thomas Blake. He had been lingering in the aisle, annoyed at the delay. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his tone dripping with entitlement. Cynthia turned to him with a smile that hadn't been offered to Jordan. "Not anymore. Sir, please, why don't you take seat 1A? Thomas smirked, slid past Jordan, and settled into the leather chair. Cynthia leaned toward Jordan again. "You'll need to move. Now." The boy looked around. Every pair of eyes seemed to avoid his, as if the passengers feared the weight of what they had just witnessed. Jordan's heart pounded, but his mind was clear. He stood up, clutching his notebook and recorder, and allowed himself to be led away. As he was guided toward a jump seat near the emergency exit, Jordan whispered under his breath, a line he had read once in his father's study. "The truth is fragile, but once it is out, it cannot be caged." Cynthia didn't hear him. She was too busy pouring champagne for Thomas Blake. From the back of the plane, Marcus Miles saw everything. He had risen halfway from his economy seat when the slap landed. His hands clenched, but he forced himself to sit down again. His jaw tightened. This was the very scenario he had both feared and anticipated. He had told himself he would let the situation play out, to see how far the system would go when confronted with his son, alone and unrecognized. Now, his heart burned with both fury and a painful kind of confirmation. 10 minutes had passed since Cynthia struck Jordan, 10 minutes that would soon reshape the future of Apex Air. The sting on Jordan Miles' cheek lingered long after he had been forced from his seat. He sat stiffly on the narrow jump seat near the emergency exit, clutching his notebook against his chest. The recorder inside his palm was still running, quietly capturing every sound. His heartbeat echoed in his ears, but he made sure his breathing stayed steady. From where he sat, Jordan could still see seat 1A. Thomas Blake leaned back in the spacious leather chair, already sipping the glass of champagne Cynthia Ward had poured with a practiced smile. Her tone, warm for him, was the same tone she had denied Jordan only minutes earlier. The difference cut deeper than the slap. Passengers around first class whispered in low voices. Some had seen everything. Others had only caught fragments. A woman in row 2 who had gasped at the slap now looked firmly out the window, as though the cloudless sky would erase what she had witnessed. A man scrolling on his phone pretended not to notice, though his eyes flicked nervously toward Jordan every few moments. The silence pressed on Jordan heavier than the slap. It was the silence of complicity, the silence that said, "Don't get involved. Don't risk your comfort." He felt it weigh on him like an invisible hand across his chest. He wanted to cry, but he swallowed the tears back. His father's words echoed inside. Calm is stronger than anger. Hold on to yourself. Jordan adjusted the strap of his seatbelt and steadied his hands. He clicked his pen and scribbled on the first page of his notebook, Site 1A. Slapped. Taken away. Nobody spoke. His handwriting shook a little, but the words steadied him. He underlined, "Nobody spoke," twice. Back in seat 1A. Thomas Blake reclined further, snapping his fingers for more service. Cynthia rushed to him like he was royalty. Their voices carried across the cabin. "Sir, I'm so sorry about the confusion earlier," Cynthia said smoothly. "No problem," Thomas replied, smirking. "These things happen. You know how kids are, trying to sneak into places they don't belong." Jordan's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. His recorder caught every word. In economy. Marcus Miles sat rigid, watching through the narrow opening between seats. Every fiber in his body wanted to march forward, reveal himself, and put an end to this humiliation. But he held back. Not because he was weak, but because he needed the truth to show itself fully. He needed the world to see what happened when no titles, no wealth, no reputation stood as a shield for his son. Minutes passed. The plane continued boarding, passengers filling in the last rows. The crew prepared for takeoff. The humiliation did not fade for Jordan. It grew sharper with every glance that slid across him and then darted away. He heard a whisper behind him from two middle-aged men. "Poor kid," one muttered. "Yeah, but you don't want to get involved. You'll get kicked off the plane," the other replied. Jordan's chest tightened again. He wrote the words in his notebook. "They are afraid." The intercom chimed. Cynthia's voice carried through the cabin, clear and authoritative. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Apex Air Flight 227 to Los Angeles. Please take your seats and fasten your seatbelts. We'll be departing shortly." Her voice did not tremble. To anyone boarding now, she sounded like the perfect professional. Only those who had witnessed the slap knew another truth. And yet, their silence held. As the engines roared to life, Jordan closed his eyes for a moment. In the darkness behind his lids, he replayed the slap, the champagne, the whispers. Shame burned in him, but so did something else, a kind of quiet determination that was older than his years. The plane lifted off the runway, climbing into the evening sky. City lights fell away, and the cabin lights dimmed further. Jordan reopened his eyes, stared down at his notebook, and whispered to himself, "They think I don't belong, but I do, and they will know it." From the back, Marcus watched his son. He saw the boy's posture straight despite the sting, calm despite the humiliation, and he knew, in his bones, that this was no ordinary moment. Something was unfolding that would soon stretch far beyond the walls of this plane. 10 minutes had passed since the slap. 10 minutes of eyes turned away. 10 minutes of silence that carried more weight than any words spoken aloud. Jordan pressed his pen harder against the paper and wrote one more line. "Silence is louder than the slap." The cabin air grew heavier as the plane leveled off above the clouds. For Jordan, miles. The jump seat near the emergency exit felt colder than any place he had ever sat. He kept the recorder running inside his palm, the faint red light blinking against his notebook. He wrote another line in shaky letters, still in the air, still not seen. It didn't take long before trouble escalated again. Cynthia Ward walked briskly down the aisle, her heels tapping against the floor with clipped authority. She leaned close to Jordan, her voice low enough that nearby passengers couldn't hear. "Oh, you're not supposed to be here either," she hissed. "After service, someone will come to take you off this flight. Don't argue. Just follow instructions." Jordan stared back at her, his cheek still warm from the earlier slap. He didn't answer. Instead, he clicked the recorder slightly louder so the device would catch every syllable. Cynthia noticed but said nothing, only tightened her lips and marched away. Minutes later, the cabin intercom chimed again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for a brief delay. We'll be returning to the gate for a quick security matter." Passengers groaned. Some cursed under their breath. A few glanced toward Jordan. The boy kept writing in his notebook, steady strokes across the page. When the plane rolled back toward the terminal, Jordan knew his removal had already been decided. The door opened. 2 men in airport uniforms stepped inside. One of them was Robert Kane, the ground supervisor for Apex Air. His face was round, his eyes sharp with the look of someone who had been doing this job long enough to know every shortcut around accountability. "Where is he?" Robert asked flatly. Cynthia pointed at Jordan without hesitation. "That's the one. Out of place. Caused disruption," she said. Robert walked up to Jordan, towering over the boy's seat. "Son, you'll need to come with us. Now." Jordan's voice was calm, but his words were deliberate. "I have my ticket. I didn't cause any disruption." Robert bent down, close enough that only Jordan could hear. "Listen carefully. You're not going to win here. Save yourself the trouble and walk quietly, or we can make this very unpleasant." Jordan held his notebook tightly against his chest. The recorder blinked on. He stood up slowly, not resisting, and followed Robert and the second officer toward the exit. Passengers whispered as he passed by. Some shook their heads. Others pretended to look at their screens. Nobody spoke up. Not one voice challenged the injustice. From row 19, Marcus Miles sat frozen, his fists tight against the armrests. He wanted to rise, to stop this spectacle, but he forced himself to wait. He needed the world to see how far the machine of silence and prejudice would go when it thought it was safe from accountability. His chest ached with every step his son took away from the cabin. In the narrow jet bridge, the air smelled metallic and stale. Robert Kane's tone grew harsher. "You'll sit in the security office until we sort this out. Don't get clever. Phones are not allowed. Do you understand?" Jordan looked at him directly. "I understand." His voice carried no anger, only a quiet weight. Inside the small security room, bare except for a metal table and 2 plastic chairs. Jordan sat down. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead. He set his notebook on the table and clicked the recorder off for the first time since the slap. His hand trembled slightly as he picked up the pen. He wrote "room with no windows." They want silence, but silence is already broken. Across the hall, Cynthia and Robert exchanged words near the staff lounge. "What if the kid makes a complaint?" Cynthia asked, her voice laced with irritation. Robert waved her off. "We'll file the report our way. We've buried worse. Nobody cares about one kid's story, especially if he doesn't have the right last name." Neither of them realized that Jordan's recorder had already caught enough. Back on the tarmac, the engines of Flight 227 roared again. Passengers settled back into their seats, relieved that the delay was ending. Some whispered about the boy. Others simply shrugged. The plane pulled away from the gate once more, leaving Jordan alone in the small room. He sat silently, breathing slowly, steadying himself. His father's words replayed in his mind like a steady drumbeat. Truth has its own power. Jordan pressed the tip of his pen into the page and wrote one more line before closing the notebook. They think this ends here, but it doesn't. The small security room buzzed with the low hum of fluorescent lights. Jordan Miles sat alone at the metal table, his notebook resting in front of him like an anchor. He pressed his palms flat against the cover, steadying himself, reminding his heart to slow down. His cheeks still tingled from the slap, but now it was the silence of the empty room that weighed most heavily on him. He remembered his father's face as he was let off the plane still and controlled, but with fire beneath the surface. Marcus had not moved. He had not spoken, and Jordan knew that silence meant something. His father was letting this unfold for a reason. Jordan flipped open his notebook and wrote, "Removed, alone. But I am not powerless." The door opened with a metallic click. A young woman slipped inside, glancing nervously over her shoulder before shutting it again. She wore the Navy uniform of Apex Air, but her badge said Emily Diaz. Her eyes darted toward the small black recorder resting by Jordan's notebook. "You're recording this," she whispered. Jordan nodded carefully. "Yes." Emily exhaled, as if making a decision. She pulled her phone from her pocket, hesitated, then tapped the screen. "I saw what happened up there," she said. Her voice shook, but her gaze was steady. "I don't care what they told you. I know the truth, and I filmed it." She turned the phone toward him. On the screen played a shaky but unmistakable video, Cynthia Ward's hand striking Jordan's face. The gasp of passengers. The sound of humiliation hanging in the air. Jordan's heart pounded. Not from fear this time, but from a glimmer of hope. "They'll fire me if they know," Emily continued, tucking the phone away. "But I couldn't let it slide. People need to see." Jordan met her eyes. "Thank you," he said softly. Emily nodded quickly, then left the room as quietly as she had entered. Minutes later, the door opened again. This time it was a woman with a journalist's bag slung across her shoulder. She wasn't in uniform. Her eyes were sharp, scanning the room the way a camera lens scans a scene. "Jordan Miles?" she asked. He hesitated. "Yes." "My name's Rachel Cooper," she said. "Freelance reporter. I was sitting in row 7. I streamed part of what happened when they walked you off. Twitter's already on fire. Hashtags trending." Jordan blinked. He wasn't sure if he believed her. Trending. Rachel smiled grimly and turned her phone around. On the screen, he saw his own image, grainy but clear. The boy in the blue polo being led away by Robert Kane. The caption beneath read, "A kid was slapped and dragged off first class. Apex Air, explain this." The video had already reached 500,000 views. Comments scrolled by so fast Jordan couldn't keep up. "This is disgusting. Boycott Apex. Where's the justice?" Rachel's voice lowered. "Listen, they'll try to bury this. They always do. But once it's out there, they can't control it. People are watching now. People are angry." Jordan's chest tightened, not from fear, but from something new resolve. He picked up his pen and wrote in his notebook, "Truth is out. People are watching." Rachel crouched closer, her tone more personal now. "You okay, kid?" Jordan nodded once. His voice was calm. "I'm okay. I just need them to stop lying." Rachel's expression softened. She placed a hand briefly on his shoulder, then stood. "Keep that recorder safe. I'll keep the video live. You're not alone anymore." She slipped out as quietly as Emily had. The door shut, leaving Jordan once again in the buzzing silence. But now it wasn't the same silence. This silence was alive, carrying the pulse of voices gathering outside the walls, millions of them. Jordan leaned back in the chair, staring up at the buzzing light. For the first time since the slap, his eyes filled not with shame, but with a quiet kind of strength. He whispered aloud to himself, as though reminding his own soul, "They think I'm alone, but I'm not. They think this ends here, but it's only the beginning." In the terminal above, passengers refreshed their phones. Hashtag Whilst Justice for Jordan surged into the trending list. A clip of the slap, Emily's shaky recording leaked to Rachel, circulated alongside Rachel's live stream. The story was spreading faster than Apex Air could contain. Inside the economy cabin, Marcus Miles' phone vibrated. He glanced down at the flood of notifications, his jaw tightening as he read the words "Justice for Jordan." His son's name was now a banner, carried by strangers across the digital world. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, then reopened them with a new steadiness. The machine of silence had already begun to crack. Back in the security room, Jordan wrote one final line for the night in his notebook before closing it. Hope came through a door. Twice. He rested his hand on the notebook, then on the recorder, and let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The slap still burned, but something else now burned brighter. The security office felt smaller with every passing minute. The fluorescent light buzzed and crackled, and the air smelled faintly of old coffee and disinfectant. Jordan Miles sat at the metal table, his notebook closed now, his recorder back in his palm. He held it as if it were a compass. The blinking red light steadied his breath. The door opened. Robert Kane stepped in with a clipboard tucked under his arm and the satisfied look of a man convinced he was in control. Behind him came a second staffer in a gray polo, setting down a paper cup of water as if this were a routine medical check. Robert did not sit. He stayed standing, looming. Jordan Miles. He began, glancing at the clipboard. We're finalizing our incident report. You were observed attempting to occupy a first-class seat without authorization. You were advised to return to your assigned seat and refused. You became verbally combative with a member of our crew. Jordan looked at the recorder in his palm, then up at Robert. His voice was quiet. I did not refuse. I had seat 1A. Robert's smile was thin. Not according to our system. Jordan reached into his pocket and slid his phone across the table. On the screen, his digital boarding pass glowed with the airline's logo and the clear black letters, Miles, Jordan, seat 1A. He tapped to show the check-in timestamp, the gate, the boarding group. Robert did not glance down. He kept his eyes on Jordan's face instead. We do not accept screenshots as proof. They can be faked. It isn't a screenshot, Jordan said, keeping his tone even. It is the live pass inside your app. It refreshed at boarding. The second staffer shifted in place, clearly uncomfortable. He leaned over to see the phone. Robert, it's got the dynamic refresh, see the moving timestamp. That's live. Robert cut him off with a look. Thank you, he said, as if the observation were inconvenient. He finally, reluctantly, skimmed the phone, then flipped his clipboard sheet to a new page. Our records do not show your name in first class. The manifest was updated after boarding to adjust for operational needs. Jordan lowered his eyes to the table for a breath. He heard again his father's voice, steady and patient. Hold on to yourself. Then he looked up. Did you update it before or after I was removed? That's irrelevant, Robert said. It is not, Jordan answered, more firmly than before, because if it was changed after, then it will still show which accounts submitted the edit and at what time. Your system logs that. You know it does. A thin pulse of heat crept up Robert's neck. He did not respond to the point, only shifted tactics. Look, son, we can make this simple. We write this up as a misunderstanding. You go home, no harm done. Jordan closed his fingers around the recorder and felt the small battery warmth against his skin. Was there a version of this where he said yes and left? Head down, story unfinished. He imagined walking out with his father in silence, never speaking of this again, letting his cheek heal while something deeper stayed bruised. He imagined how easy that would be. He imagined how wrong. He lifted his eyes. Harm was done. Robert's smile vanished. Careful, he said. His tone lost its sugar. You want to make this harder? Jordan thought of the jump seat, the champagne poured for Thomas Blake, the woman in row 2 staring out the window like the sky could clean her conscience. He thought of Emily Diaz risking her job for a video. He thought of Rachel Cooper, whose phone screen was a river of comments pouring into the world. He thought of his father, calm an economy, because this needed to be seen. He made a choice. "I want the truth," Jordan said. Robert exhaled through his nose and nodded to the staffer. "Step out," he ordered. When they were alone, he leaned over the table. "Too close. Here is the truth. Kids like you make noise, and then you go away. You aren't the first. You won't be the last. We are the airline. We decide what's on the manifest, what is disruption, what is safety. We will file the report and move on." Jordan held his gaze. "I recorded the slap." For a fraction of a second, the room changed temperature. Robert's face did not move, but his eyes sharpened. "Excuse me. I recorded the slap," Jordan repeated. "Steady. And the words after. I also have your voice, just now, saying what you decide and why." Robert straightened, hands flat on the table to hide the sudden stiffness in his fingers. "You were informed that recording inside secured facilities is prohibited." I was not," Jordan said. "And even if I was, the law cares what happened more than the sign on your door." Robert's jaw worked. "We have policies, and I have evidence," Jordan said. A knock at the door interrupted the staring match. It opened without waiting for a reply. Cynthia Ward slipped in, cheeks pink with strain, hair still perfect. She carried a folder thick with printed forms and a pen clipped to the front. When she saw the recorder on the table, her expression flickered. "We need this done now," she said to Robert, ignoring Jordan. "Flight Ops is pushing back. They want closure. I wrote the statement." He refused instructions. He was verbally aggressive. He attempted to switch seats. I cited concern for crew safety. Jordan felt a wave of cold surprise, not at the lies themselves, he had expected those, but at how cleanly they were arranged on paper. He imagined his name as a line on a form. He imagined it misfiled into the category labeled trouble. Cynthia finally turned to him. "Sign this, and you can leave." Jordan read the top line. Incident report, minor passenger, refused to comply. His throat tightened. For a moment, a small voice in him whispered that this was easier. Let it be done. Go home. Forget seat 1A. Forget the eyes. Forget the sting. Another voice rose up behind it, quiet and older, the one he had been learning to listen to in his father's study at night. Do not let them rename what happened. He lifted the recorder and pressed the button to mark a new clip. The soft beep sounded like a bell in the small room. "I will not sign a lie," Jordan said. Cynthia's mouth flattened. "You think this is court? You think your little gadget will save you?" Jordan kept his voice level. "No, I think people will—" Cynthia barked a laugh. "People do not care. People scroll. Tomorrow there is another outrage." The door opened again. Rachel Cooper slid in sideways, breathless, holding up her press badge. "Apologies. I was told this was the wrong room. Turns out it is the right one." She took in the scene, the folder, the boy, the recorder, and raised her phone halfway. "Not yet filming. Would you like to comment, Ms. Ward, on the allegation that you struck a minor in first class and then attempted to falsify a report?" Cynthia froze. Robert's face flushed. "Get out," he said. "This is a secured internal process." Rachel's smile was practiced. "Then you will not mind if I wait in the hall and report that access to the minor was blocked while the airline drafted its own narrative." She met Jordan's eyes for a second, a quick nod of encouragement. Then she slipped back into the corridor. The silence after she left felt different. It was the kind that follows thunder. Robert snapped the folder shut. "We are done here." Jordan spoke first. I want to call my father. Robert hesitated for the first time. He checked his watch, then the hallway, then his phone. Notifications crawled across his lock screen faster than he could clear them. He thumbed one open. The hashtag that had been a trickle an hour ago was now a flood. He forced a neutral tone. "You will have 5 minutes." Jordan dialed. The line connected on the first ring. "Dad," he said, and the calm he had worked so hard to maintain flickered with relief. "I am in the security office. They want me to sign that I refused instructions." Marcus Miles' voice came through low and steady. "Do not sign anything." "I did not." Jordan said, "Good." Marcus replied. A pause, then a softened question. "How are you?" Son Jordan looked at the recorder, at the closed folder, at Cynthia's rigid posture and Robert's clenched jaw. He felt the burn on his cheek and the steadiness in his spine. "I am okay," he said. "I am not alone." Marcus exhaled, a sound like a promise set down gently. "Stay where you are. I am on my way." The call ended. Robert's composure cracked. He is on his way where Jordan did not answer. He slid his phone back and unfolded his hands on the table. Cynthia tried one more time, the last defense of certainty. "You do not understand how this works. We write, you sign, we move on." Jordan met her eyes, not with anger, but with a kind of quiet pity. "You do not understand how this changed. People saw—" The clock on the wall clicked once. Inside the room, nothing moved. Outside, the hallway rustled with the sound of a gathering crowd. Somewhere above them, the terminal speakers pinged with breaking news, and the airport's pulse shifted from routine to attention. Jordan opened his notebook and wrote a single line. "The truth is breathing." The airport's security office was never meant to hold the weight of truth. It was built for paperwork, for delays, for tired travelers caught in bureaucratic nets. But tonight, the walls carried something different. They vibrated faintly with the sound of phones buzzing outside, voices rising in the terminal, and the invisible hum of millions watching a story take shape online. Jordan Miles sat straighter at the metal table, notebook open in front of him. His recorder blinked steadily. He had written only 4 words since the call with his father, but they sat heavy on the page. The truth is breathing. Robert Kane paced the length of the room, phone in hand, typing furiously. Notifications kept interrupting his screen, pulling his face tighter with each new headline. Cynthia Ward sat rigid in her chair, folder clutched like a shield, her lips pressed together in silent fury. The door creaked open. Emily Diaz slipped inside again, her young face pale but determined. She held her phone in both hands as though it were an offering. "It's everywhere now," she said softly. She placed the phone on the table, on the screen. Jordan saw himself again, his small frame being led from the cabin, Cynthia pointing, Robert's stern face behind. The clip had been reposted by celebrities, politicians, and even civil rights organizations. The comment thread swelled with anger and heartbreak. Cynthia's eyes narrowed. "You," she spat at Emily. "You leaked it." Emily didn't flinch. "I did the right thing," Robert snapped, his voice low and sharp. "You'll never work in aviation again." Emily looked at Jordan instead of Robert. "Maybe not, but at least I'll be able to sleep." The air in the room thickened. For the first time, Jordan felt that the weight pressing down wasn't only on him, it was shifting onto them, the adults who had chosen lies. The door opened again, harder this time. Marcus Miles stepped inside. He wore no suit, no tie, only the calm expression of a man who had prepared his entire life for this kind of confrontation. His presence filled the small room. Robert tried to assert control. "Mr. Miles, this is a secured." Marcus lifted a hand. The simple gesture silenced the room. He looked first at his son, then at the folder in Cynthia's grip. "What are you asking him to sign?" Cynthia's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "It's a standard incident report." Marcus walked forward slowly, deliberately. He lifted the folder from her hands, flipped the cover, and read. His jaw set harder with each line. He closed it, placed it back on the table, and looked directly at Cynthia. "You fabricated this." Cynthia flushed, her practiced authority crumbling under his gaze. "Sir, I was only. You struck my son." Marcus interrupted, his tone still calm but edged with steel. "You struck a 13-year-old child who was sitting in the seat he paid for. Then you wrote him into the role of aggressor." Robert tried to interject. "Mr. Miles, we can resolve this internally." Marcus turned his eyes to Robert. "No. You buried the manifest. You threatened my son. You told him kids like him make noise and go away." Robert froze. His words had returned to him, echoed now by the man who owned 20% of the airline he served. Marcus sat beside Jordan at the table, placing one steady hand on his son's shoulder. His voice softened. "Are you all right?" Jordan nodded slowly. "I'm okay. Dad, I didn't sign." A flicker of pride crossed Marcus's face. He turned back to the others. "Do you know what happens when you strike a child in first class, then drag him into silence? The world does not look away. Not anymore." The door pushed open once more. Rachel Cooper stepped inside, her phone raised, live stream still running. Behind her, the murmur of voices in the terminal grew louder. Cameras flashed through the doorway. "Mr. Miles," Rachel said, her voice carrying for both the room and the audience beyond. "Do you have a statement for the public?" Marcus looked at her, then at Jordan, then at the blinking recorder on the table. He spoke clearly, each word measured. "Yes, my son has been assaulted, humiliated, and lied about, but he is not powerless, and neither are we. Apex Air must answer not just to me, but to every passenger who has ever been treated as less than human at 30,000 feet." The room fell into silence. Cynthia shifted in her chair. Robert's phone buzzed again, the screen flashing with a message he dared not read. Marcus's gaze swept the room. This will not be buried. This will be the beginning. Jordan reached for his notebook and wrote the words as his father spoke them. The truth was breathing louder now, filling every corner, leaking through the cracks of walls never built to contain it. By the time Marcus Miles walked his son out of the cramped security office, the terminal outside had transformed. Travelers stood clustered around their phones, their screens glowing with Rachel Cooper's live feed. Strangers whispered Jordan's name like he was a symbol bigger than himself. Some clapped softly as the boy passed, a ripple of recognition that made Jordan's cheeks flush with something new dignity. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Marcus held his son's shoulder firmly, shielding him from the crowd without hiding him. "One step at a time," he murmured. Jordan nodded, his fingers tight on his notebook. The next morning, while the hashtag Justice for Jordan surged past 5 million posts, Marcus convened an emergency session of Apex Air's board of directors. The room was sleek and cold, walls lined with glass, a view of the skyline beyond. But inside, tension pulsed thicker than the air outside. Executives sat in tailored suits, their voices low, some glancing nervously at the cameras stationed outside the boardroom doors. Marcus entered with Jordan beside him. He had insisted his son sit at the table, not in the back, not hidden. At the far end sat the CEO of Apex Air, William Harland, a man whose silver hair and perfect tie concealed a history of careful avoidance. He cleared his throat. "Marcus, the situation is unfortunate, but I assure you we are investigating. Cynthia Ward has been suspended. Robert Kane is on leave. We'll issue a statement. These things blow over." Marcus leaned forward, his eyes steady. "A child was struck in first class. My child. And your airline tried to bury it. That will not blow over. This is not a matter of suspension or public relations. This is a matter of justice and change." A board member shifted in his seat. "Marcus, surely you don't expect I expect accountability." Marcus cut in, his tone calm but sharp enough to slice through the room, not only for Cynthia and Robert, but for a culture that allowed them to believe they could get away with it. This board must decide whether Apex Air continues as it has, or whether it stands for something better. Jordan watched quietly, his notebook open, his pen steady. He felt the weight of eyes on him. For the first time, he was not just the boy in seat 1A, he was part of the story unfolding in real time. Rachel Cooper stood against the wall with her camera, streaming live with permission. The world was watching the boardroom too. Marcus rose from his chair. "Let me be clear. I own 20% of this airline. I can freeze every operational account until an external investigation is launched, until policies are rewritten, until mandatory training is enforced for every employee, from the cabin crew to this board itself." Gasps scattered across the table. One executive dropped his pen. Harlan's face blanched. "Marcus, you wouldn't." Marcus's voice did not rise, but the power in it filled the room. 10 minutes after my son was slapped, I chose not to intervene. I chose to let this airline reveal itself, and it did. Now I will intervene. Consider the accounts frozen as of this moment. He pulled a folder from his briefcase and placed it on the table. Inside were signed directives, legally binding through the trust that held his shares. The room erupted. Some voices shouted about stock collapse. Others begged for delay. But Rachel's live stream carried it all. The noise of an empire realizing its silence had reached its limit. Through it all, Jordan wrote a single line in his notebook. "Power is not silence. Power is choice." He looked at his father, whose calm face revealed both the weight of restraint and the strength of resolve. For the first time, Jordan understood what Marcus had meant all along. Truth had power, but power also had truth. Outside, the world waited. Inside, the boardroom cracked open to something it had never faced before: accountability. The boardroom had dissolved into chaos after Marcus Miles froze Apex Air's accounts. Executives shouted about stock freefall, customers demanding refunds, regulators already circling like hawks. Yet Marcus remained seated, his son beside him, the quiet center of the storm. When the noise finally dimmed, Marcus placed a small black recorder on the polished table. The same recorder Jordan had held since the slap. Its red light blinked steadily, like a heartbeat. "This," Marcus said evenly, "is the truth you tried to erase?" He pressed play. The room filled with the crack of Cynthia Ward's palm against Jordan's cheek. Gasps echoed, even though most had already seen it online. Then Cynthia's cold words followed. "You don't belong here." The sound of Thomas Blake sliding smugly into seat 1A. Robert Kane's low threats in the security room. And finally, Robert's voice declaring, "We decide what's on the manifest. What is disruption? What is safety?" The recording ended. Silence clung to the air like smoke after a fire. William Harland, the CEO, shifted uncomfortably. His voice was low, defensive. Marcus, surely you understand. We must protect the airline's image. The airline's image, Marcus interrupted, his voice calm but unflinching. That image struck my son. That image dragged him into silence. That image wrote lies into a report. Do you know what an image built on silence really is? It is rot, painted over in silver. Jordan watched his father, his chest swelling with both pride and awe. He turned to a fresh page in his notebook and wrote, "The slap was the crack. The truth is the flood." Rachel Cooper's live stream captured every second. Comments poured across the screen and real-time viewers demanding resignations, lawmakers promising hearings, families sharing their own stories of humiliation in airports. Emily Diaz, standing quietly in the corner, stepped forward. Her voice shook, but her words rang clear. "I filmed the video that leaked. I knew I'd lose my job, but I couldn't watch a child be treated like that. I'm ready to testify." A ripple of shock moved through the boardroom. Harlan glared, but Marcus nodded in respect. "You will not lose your livelihood for telling the truth. Not while I sit at this table." Jordan lifted his pen again. Courage spreads when one voice refuses to stay quiet. But just as hope swelled, another twist landed. Thomas Blake, the passenger who had taken seat 1A, walked into the boardroom escorted by legal counsel. His smirk was gone, replaced with a mask of indignation. "My family has received death threats because of this circus," Thomas said, his voice sharp. "All I did was sit where I was told. I will not be scapegoated." Marcus looked at him coolly. "All you did was benefit from a lie, and you stayed silent when you could have spoken. That silence is not neutral, it is complicity." Thomas bristled, his lawyer tugging at his sleeve. "We'll sue for defamation." The attorney barked. Rachel's live stream caught every word. The comments turned harsher, unforgiving. Viewers saw not a victim, but a man still clutching privilege like armor. Jordan wrote in his notebook, "Silence is a choice. Silence is power, misused." The board recessed briefly under the pressure of media calls, lawyers whispering, regulators knocking. In the pause, Marcus leaned close to his son. "This will get uglier before it gets better. Are you ready?" Jordan's eyes didn't waver. "I've been ready since seat 1A. The board reconvened minutes later, faces pale, tempers frayed. William Harlan tried to restore order, but the balance had already shifted. The truth was no longer theirs to contain. Marcus stood once more, his hand resting on Jordan's shoulder. "You have one chance left," he said, addressing the board. "Not to save your seats, not to protect your profits, but to prove you understand that human dignity is not negotiable. Show the world you are capable of change, or watch the world move without you." Jordan closed his notebook, the sound loud in the tense room. He whispered the words he had just written, almost to himself, but loud enough for the nearest executives to hear. "The truth is breathing, and it's louder than your silence. The weight of evidence, video, audio, testimony, and the presence of a child whose calm refused to be broken pressed down on the boardroom like gravity itself. For the first time, Apex Air's leaders looked less like a board of directors and more like passengers in a storm, unsure if they would land safely. The boardroom meeting adjourned in chaos. But the world outside was no longer waiting for Apex Air's permission to react. By the next morning, news anchors across every major network replayed the slap in slow motion, overlaid with commentary about race, privilege, and the fragile contract of trust between airlines and passengers. Jordan Miles sat on the living room couch at home, his notebook in his lap, watching the coverage unfold. His cheek had faded from red to pale. But the memory burned hotter than before. Every time the clip replayed, he tightened his grip on the pen. Across the screen flashed his own face. Sometimes the boy who was slapped, sometimes the boy who stayed calm. His father stood behind him, silent, arms folded as though holding the weight of the entire moment. Marcus knew the story had outgrown even him. It was no longer only about a father and a son. It was about millions of travelers who had swallowed humiliation in silence. The phone rang endlessly. Civil rights attorneys, lawmakers, advocacy groups, even celebrities asking to lend their voice. Marcus answered only a few. "This is not a brand," he repeated. "This is not a campaign. This is about truth." Later that week, a Senate subcommittee announced hearings into discrimination in air travel. Cameras flashed as Marcus and Jordan walked side by side up the marble steps of Capitol Hill. Reporters shouted questions. "Marcus, will you sue Apex Jordan?" "Are you afraid to fly again?" Jordan paused at the top of the stairs, lifted his notebook, and spoke softly into the cluster of microphones. "I'm not afraid. I just want no one else to go through what I went through. Not in seat 1A, not in any seat." The simplicity of his words struck harder than anger could. That night, news commentators replayed them as a soundbite of rare clarity. Inside the packed hearing room, senators leaned forward as Marcus testified. His tone was measured, professional, but each word carried the weight of personal betrayal. Airlines sell dignity with every ticket. You are not only purchasing a seat, you are purchasing the promise of equal treatment. When that promise is broken, it is not an inconvenience. It is an assault on trust. It is an assault on humanity itself. Jordan's turn followed. He was nervous, his hand trembling as he adjusted the microphone. But when he looked out at the room filled with cameras, lawyers, and strangers, his father's words echoed in his chest. "Calm is stronger than anger. Hold on to yourself." "I wrote down everything," Jordan said, lifting his notebook. "I recorded what they did. I didn't fight because I wanted the truth to speak louder than my anger. But I need to ask, why should a kid have to carry proof just to be treated like he belongs?" The room fell still. Not even the clicking of cameras interrupted. Senators glanced at each other, as if unsure how to respond to a question that pierced deeper than any statistic. Outside, crowds gathered on the Capitol lawn, holding signs. "Seat 1A belongs to all of us." Justice for Jordan. Dignity cannot be downgraded. In the days that followed, Apex Air scrambled to issue reform's mandatory anti-bias training, independent oversight committees, AI monitoring of passenger treatment. William Harland held a press conference promising a new era of fairness. But for many, the promises sounded hollow. Trust, once cracked, could not be repainted with slogans. What mattered more were the stories that surfaced. Passengers from across the country shared their own humiliations. Elderly veterans denied boarding, disabled travelers left without assistance, Black families separated in seating. Each story piled onto the wave until it was no longer about one slap, but about a silence that had lasted decades. In his room one night, Jordan opened his notebook to a fresh page. The words came slowly at first, then poured out. The slap was not just mine. It was every story no one believed. Every voice told to be quiet. Every ticket that said welcome but meant wait. I carried a recorder, but the truth was already waiting in millions of people. All I did was press play. Marcus entered quietly, reading over his son's shoulder. His hand rested on Jordan's back. "Do you know what you've done?" he asked gently. Jordan looked up, unsure. "You've made the world listen," Marcus said. For a moment, Jordan let himself believe it. Not fully, not completely, but enough. Enough to close his notebook. Enough to set down his pen. Enough to breathe without the weight of silence pressing on his chest. Months passed, but the echo of that slap still lingered in the air like thunder that refuses to fade. Apex Air had tried to rebrand, rolling out glossy commercials about new beginnings and equal skies. Yet most viewers could not watch those ads without seeing Jordan Miles' calm face, his notebook in hand, his quiet words piercing louder than corporate slogans. Jordan returned to school, where classmates treated him differently. Some looked at him with awe, others with awkwardness, unsure what to say. Teachers invited him to speak in assemblies about courage and dignity. But Jordan was still a boy, still someone who liked drawing in the margins of his notebook, still someone who played basketball on cracked asphalt courts, still someone who sometimes just wanted to blend in. At home, the weight of what had happened pressed and lifted in turns. Reporters still called. Advocates still asked him to appear. Jordan said yes sometimes, no other times. His father respected both answers. Marcus knew his son carried not only the memory of a slap, but also the burden of being turned into a symbol. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the skyline, Marcus and Jordan sat together on the balcony. Marcus poured 2 glasses of lemonade, handed one to his son, and spoke with unusual softness. "Do you know what I admire most about you?" Jordan shook his head. "You did not let anger write your story. You let truth write it. That takes more strength than most men I've ever met." Jordan stared at his glass, the condensation dripping down onto his fingers. "Sometimes I still feel the slap. Dad, not on my cheek. Just in here." He pressed a hand to his chest. Marcus nodded slowly. "That feeling may never go away completely, but it will remind you why you stood still, why you refused to sign a lie, why you spoke when silence was easier." Jordan opened his notebook, scribbling quietly as the city darkened. The slap was pain, but it was also proof that silence breaks when someone chooses not to be quiet. Far beyond their balcony, ripples of change continued. The Senate passed new oversight regulations for airlines, requiring independent audits of passenger treatment. Civil rights groups launched campaigns for dignity in public travel. Other industries, too, began questioning their first class versus everybody else structures, wondering what dignity cost and who was paying the price. Emily Diaz became a public advocate for whistleblower protections in aviation. She spoke humbly about fear and courage, her story embraced by those who understood the risk she had taken. Rachel Cooper was hired by a major network, her career built not on chasing scandals, but on amplifying truth. And Cynthia Ward and Robert Kane. Their names became synonymous with arrogance and cover-ups. Their careers dissolved into silence, reminders that authority without accountability collapses under its own weight. As for Thomas Blake, he retreated from public life. For all his lawyer's bluster, the world saw him as a man who sat quietly in a stolen seat while a child was struck. No lawsuit could scrub that image away. But the real transformation was harder to see. It was in passengers speaking up when a gate agent dismissed them. It was in strangers offering solidarity in terminals. It was in quiet conversations around dinner tables about fairness, dignity, and what kind of world they wanted their children to inherit. On the anniversary of that night, Marcus and Jordan boarded another flight together. This time, their names were called respectfully, their tickets scanned without question. When they sat side by side in first class, the attendants offered water, their smiles steady but nervous. They knew who they were serving. Jordan opened his notebook and wrote Seat 1A again. But this time, I am not alone. The truth sits with me. The world sits with me. As the plane lifted into the sky, he closed his eyes. The burn of the slap still lived somewhere inside, but it was quieter now, buried under something stronger. Not anger, not victory, but hope that his story had become more than his own. The slap that once tried to silence him had, instead, awakened voices across a nation, and from that night forward, every time Jordan pressed his pen to the page, he knew one truth above all: no one could ever again tell him he did not belong. The story of Jordan and Marcus Miles is not only about a slap on an airplane. It is about dignity, silence, and the courage to stand calmly in the face of injustice. For older generations, it reminds us of moments when staying quiet felt safer, but also of the deep cost that silence leaves behind. Jordan chose not to lash out in anger. He chose to let truth carry his voice. Marcus, his father, reminded us that true strength is measured not by power alone, but by how we use it to protect the vulnerable. The lesson for us is clear dignity is not a luxury. It is a right. And every time we see someone stripped of it, we face a choice: look away or stand alongside them. In daily life, this lesson applies in simple ways: speaking up when a neighbor is mistreated, offering kindness when someone is judged unfairly, refusing to let fear write our response. It teaches us that even small acts of courage can ripple outward into great change. The slap may have started on one flight, but its echo reminds us all silence is not neutrality. Silence is a choice, and truth is always louder. Thank you for watching and for opening your heart to this story. If it touched you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep telling stories that matter, stories of dignity, courage, and hope. Stay with us for the next journey.